Welcome back. I am holding in my hands a weighty tome that I should turn around and show the cover to, because that is the beginning point for this morning's conversation. I confess that I have left my reading eyeglasses at home, so the good news about that is that I have the world's foremost expert on 3D thinking in design and architecture, from antiquity to the future. And this is its author, Roger Burrows. Good morning, sir. How are you?
Good morning.
Nice to see you.
Nice to see you.
Thank you for visiting.
Thank you for having me.
Well, a fascinating topic, and you know, I make a little bit of fun of the fact that this is a weighty treatise, but it's a very big umbrella under which we have a great luxury to discuss the breadth of the beauty and the elegance of design in nature that, of course, we've been trying in some ways to imitate in our human ways over these many millennia.
A long time. Yeah, the book traces the development of really 3D thinking through time. It goes from Neolithic all the way through Egypt, through ancient Greece, you name it. Celtic, Islamic, Renaissance, right the way through to the future, potential future. And the sort of formula for the book is that it looks at the reasons why a solution was found. So if, for example, you look at the Indus Valley, it might sound sort of silly, but even the brick sizes in the buildings were of a uniform size, and that was for taxation. It was for tax. And so often taxation becomes a part of the formula of invention. You know, if you look at ancient Egypt, why did they use squares? Well, they used squares because, well, one is the fields flooded. They wanted to reestablish fields. So they have this grid system,
Right.
and again, taxation rears its ugly head.
Interesting.
And things like that, navigation, it's a key thing in time. So if you're trying to understand Stonehenge,
Yes.
think navigation, think north, south, east, west, summer solstice. You know, everything has this sort of story. It's an equation almost. So as I looked at the various cultures through time, I had this formula. You know, the navigation, time, how to tell time, how to count, you know, what was the knowledge that was available, what materials were available.
And in some ways it feels as though you're retracing journeys and finding and inserting bits of the story, chapters perhaps, that may be missing from the obvious record, and yet it seems, I'm sure if you take these journeys, that some of these spots with enough dedication to detail, that some of these missing little bits fall right in, and in the after look back, you go, oh, well, that's perfectly logical. That makes total sense. Whether it be for a nonsensical reason, but a pattern nevertheless. Talk a little bit about, if you would, in repeatedly seeing and citing taxation, which is a fascinating aspect of this. And I don't want to get sidetracked from the beauty of design, but by the same token, one question that occurred to me is, I presumed when you made that comment, I could understand it, I could fill in. I was also jumping to the conclusion that this is always a bad thing for design. Is it always? Are there instances that you have come across where the insertion of, we'll call it administration, has benefited design?
It's an interesting point, and I think you've got it when you say there are pathways to knowledge. You can see the beginning of a concept. It might be in native, pre-Columbian Americas. You can see the beginning when people are trying to find directions, north, south. Shortest shadow of every day is north, points north. So you get these sort of institutions developing, often for survival. But as soon as you get an established culture, then you get formalism, then you start to get regulations, you start to get taxation, and things like that. And I think some of the negatives are due to that formalism. You know,
Sure.
I think we're wedded to the square grids.
Yeah,
We live in rectangular environments.
we do.
And we don't even notice it, really. I mean, if you look at Neolithic cave paintings, the cavemen didn't paint neat rectangles on the walls.
Right, there's no proscenium around the action,
No.
as it were.
So it sort of compounds on itself. The sort of dominance of the rectangle. Like, go to New York. I mean, everything's rectangular.
Yeah.
But if you went to, say, Timbuktu in Africa, your available material is mud. You build mud houses.
Yeah.
And then you start to look at, well, the natural form of mud is more curved. So you have sort of conical dwellings that people were happy to live in. But then again, you get uniformity. So tax can be put on a standard building block, a standard length of timber.
Mm-hmm.
This is all standard. This is what I call the Home Depot world.
Yeah, for sure.
It's an economic solution.
Welcome to IKEA.
IKEA.
With all of this work in looking at design and architecture, I'm sure that at some point you have to have become a little bit sociologist and psychologist, as you're not just looking at design in a vacuum, but you're looking at design within cultures. And I'm curious what some of the kind of standout moments maybe of discovery or realization or understanding that are tied to that, as you ably cite the building materials being something that presages what your architecture is going to look like. What are some of the outstanding things that you've learned in the process of putting this tome together that have been obviously maybe not so much surprise left in your intellectual career, but were there some in the writing of this book?
Oh, very much so. It's sort of full of it. Culture, tradition, they sort of help formalize a logic. And when it says 3D thinking, it's really talking about geometry and logic. Because if you had a human need, say, go back to navigation. If I said to you 10,000 years ago, we'll meet, I want to meet you in a certain amount of time at a certain amount of place. Well, if I don't have a compass, I don't have a watch, I don't have a clock, don't have a calendar, how am I going to communicate that to you?
Right.
So out of that will come the sense of, north, south, east, west, time, and all of those things will start to kick in. The culture starts to form when you get things like spiritual belief. In ancient times, the stars were magic. They moved.
Right.
They moved in the night sky. And then there was these wandering dots, which were called planets.
Yeah.
And then some bright spark noticed that the star motions corresponded with seasonal events, when to plant. But the interpretation of, what were the stars? What was the sun? What was the earth? So this is the cultural phenomena that creeps in all the way through. In the Renaissance, another path that I found fascinating was the path of what people considered were divine proportions.
Yes.
So in Egypt, as I mentioned, square grids were for fields, for determining tax. The blocks for the pyramids, the mathematics they used to determine how the stones, how many stones,
Sure.
what the labor would be. You get beliefs formulating through those cultural events.
Yeah.
Why a pyramid? Why would you even build it?
Right. Right.
So culture and mathematics and geometry, it all links. And so, if you look at divine proportion, whole numbers in Egypt, whole numbers in Greece. If you look at a temple in Greece, understand it with whole numbers. A lot of people think of the golden ratio, but that's a much more recent phenomena in terms of ideal proportion. Euclid mentions it in ancient Greece, but it's really not picked up until the last 200 years.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a proportion. So you've got the sort of spiritual aspect, you know, what makes us better human beings?
Indeed.
You've got that all the way through.
And that to me seems like this really central beauty of the subject matter, and a consideration thereof is this interweaving that cannot be stopped between the logical, intellectual, scientific, computational side and the human, emotional, psychological, visceral side, and that these all come together.
There's a chapter on sort of tales from Neolithic. So some of the first Neolithic logics were pathway logics, meaning that they're like spirals, like circles, like concentric circles. You get labyrinths. Labyrinths, they appear 8,000 years ago in rock etchings. Labyrinths are picked up in the Greek legends, you know, Theseus.
And so the physical world is being discovered in an intellectual way, that the labyrinth almost becomes a literal description of physical phenomena, but also metaphor and tools for understanding.
Very much. I mean, the legends, a labyrinth, starting, as I said, you know, 8,000-9,000 years ago, in rock etchings. That the legends associated are, you know, going into the kingdom of the dead, or spring and winter, and people entering and leaving. And then you have in Greek legend the Minotaur, the creature with the body of the man and the head of a bull, devouring, you know, all the sacrifices that are sent in. So you have these legends, and then they're picked up in the early Renaissance of, you know, thoughts about labyrinths. Mm-hmm. The Chartres Cathedral, it has this massive labyrinth in a medieval cathedral.
Right.
It's huge. Yeah. And it's the same sort of thing. You go towards the center, you come back. As you navigate a labyrinth, you just don't go straight to the center. You go towards it, away, towards, round, through
There's
corners.
even the word labyrinthine, implying not just what the structure is, but the difficulty of which to navigate as well. And it's kind of contained in that, how fascinating words are. Roger, let's take a quick break, because I want to talk after a quick commercial break about how you have been changed by the writing of this book.
Thank you.
More with Roger Burrows right after this. Please stay tuned. Welcome back. We are having a lovely conversation on a fascinating topic. It is based on this book. Its author is Roger Burrows. He is with me, and its title is 3D Thinking in Design and Architecture, From Antiquity to the Future. Welcome back.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here. So my question that I posited before the break, I'm going to expand on a little bit. My question was, how have you been changed by the writing of this book? And I think the other question that I'll tag on, and we can come back to it, it's kind of a big two-parter, but is, after doing this kind of serious work, there must be takeaways in terms of what your vision of the future is. Not that it has to be the be-all, but what your personal vision of what happens when we take all of this analysis, all of this realization, and then live into that future that's referred to in the title.
Good question.
It's a lot of question, I realize. I'm sorry.
Well, my background is mathematics and technology development. When I did all the research for the book and traveled to get the information and the knowledge, I was looking, as I said, I came up with a methodology of looking. But I was always looking for ideas that I could take into the future. And I found that many ideas of the past were really quite inspirational. The limit of them was the limit of their time. So, you know, when someone figured out how to construct the pointed arch, for example, that was an amazing discovery. It was amazing. Suddenly you can build higher. And how about, you know, the guy who was counting his sheep and figured he had more than 5 sheep, and what the hell was he going to do?
Right.
You know, all right, well, okay, I've got 2 hands. You know, the interesting thing, and it's an aside, there's this, was it the Cherokee? I forget, Ashkenazi, one of the Native American tribes. That wasn't 5, that was 4. They counted the gaps. It was 4. Sorry, that's an aside, but it does.
That's great. No, that's great. And more to the point of perception creates reality in so many cases, because the first perceiver then starts to set the formulation of what it is that we do, to the point where, what do you see?
Yeah.
Do you see 5 fingers, or do you see 4 gaps between fingers?
Yes. There's all these little twists and turns, but when you are looking at ideas of the past and realizing the brilliance of them, I mean, total brilliance.
Yes, yes.
I mean,
humbling.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds trite, and it might remind everyone of school geometry, which is hideous. Sorry.
Sorry, everyone.
It's taught in a hideous fashion. But the invention of the triangle is amazing. Mm-hmm. I mean, think about that triangle. We're using triangles today in the latest animations, in the latest Star Wars movies, all of those special effects. It really comes down to triangles, mapping the world in triangles. But we can go right back. I mean, the first geometries, the first navigation, calculus, you know, everything sort of, you know, stems from triangles and squares and right angles and all the rest of it.
Absolutely.
Each one a wonderful invention. Mm-hmm. But some of those inventions of the past sort of died. They were limited by their time. They didn't have the materials. They didn't have the cultural opportunity to develop them. So they're sort of sitting there. Right. And then in the book, you'll see I found many like that. And being the type of person that I am, which is really like an inventor, mm-hmm. I've taken some of those ideas and developed them in the book. And one of the big ones that I'm quite proud of, if you like, is shape changes. So I looked at a Roman mosaic. It was composed of squares and diamond shapes. I also saw the same shapes in the early period of Islam, in the Abbasid era, the same shapes. And there they were, but in Islam they were used 3-dimensionally. And something called makanas, they're called makanas. They're sort of like stalactite formations. So there's the same shapes again. And then I started to wonder, well, how would you take something that was flat, the Roman mosaic, conceptually, make it sort of 3-dimensional, like a sort of stalactite formation in early Islamic buildings? You know, how would you do that? And I came up with the thought, well, maybe they connected them flexibly. Maybe they took a square and a diamond, and instead of having them rigid, they had them flexible. Right. So I explored that, and I came up with a whole family of shape-changing forms, polyhedra, shape-changing forms. And the reason why that's so interesting is it's a phenomena of today. MIT are working on shape-changing robots, flat. They've transformed, they become 3-dimensional, using very simple geometrical shapes.
Interesting.
Even Brigham Young, they worked on a shape-changing solar array. Because when you package a solar array for a rocket, it can't be fully deployed. You'd have to have a massive rocket.
Right.
So they have really a folded-in rocket, which is built on, well, you know, sort of like an origami, but it's different.
Sure. You introduce the concept of the hinge, and now you go from
flexible,
2-dimension to 3-dimension.
Polygonal shape. So that's in there, and a bunch of other things are in there like that. So yeah, I've certainly been inspired, and I've certainly loved tracking down the sort of enthusiasm of a concept. Whether it's 2,000 years ago, I don't care. Because it was great.
Sure. And discovery in any moment, even if it's not a recent moment. And I sense that this is something that you've done over and over again in the authoring of this book, is to be exposed to the sense of wonder that each of these discoveries, and if you contextualize a discovery in its time and place, as Robbie is saying right in my ear right now, it will blow your mind. And that is the beauty of this, I would think, of this scientific journey of discovery that you've been on in synthesizing disparate parts into a lot of information.
See, the back of the book is the Brigham Young solar array.
Oh, yes.
That's it. So that was
the solar array. Fantastic. Good stuff. Roger, thank you so much for being here. I have 1,000 questions more and no time left, so I'm going to hopefully ask that you would come and visit on the Evening Mountain Views program, and we can continue this conversation.
Can I quickly say?
Of course you can.
The book's available in
Yes,
dollars.
all of that. Yes, we'll always do that. Go ahead.
I don't know which one. The book's available in dollars.
Okay, great.
It's available through Amazon. There is a sort of simple companion book, which is this guy. This is put together.
Straight ahead on that guy right there.
Okay.
Nice.
This is like a simpler one. It's sort of like a coloring book, but it follows the same path in a simpler way. This one's available through dollars as well, Amazon, but also through Park City Publishing. I will be on June the 3rd in Silly Market, and the
great.
Park City Publishing booth. There will be events.
Fantastic.
And you'll hear about them.
We'll have you back to chat more about all of those dates and all that sort of thing. It's great that you'll be out at Park Silly. Of course, a lovely event here in town. And thank you so very much. This is a really entertaining and enlightening conversation, and we appreciate you joining us this early in the morning. And I can't wait to see what is up next for you and to ask you the rest of those many, many questions that I have. So nice to meet you.
Thank
and
you.
Lovely work, and thank you for this. It's really great. You guys, that is Roger Burrows. The book is 3D Thinking in Design and Architecture, From Antiquity to the Future. And I feel like I'm kind of like a student. I've got my book, and I'm just heading off to lecture. We're going to take a break. There's more show after this. Please stay tuned. We'll be right back.